Welcome back to another edition of NCIA's Industry Essentials Educational Webinars. For those tuning in for the first time, NCIA's Industry Essentials webinar series is our premier digital educational platform featuring a variety of interactive programming, all designed to provide you timely, engaging, and essential education when and where your team needs it most. I'm your host, Brian Gilbert, the Deputy Director of Events and Education here at NCIA, and I'm incredibly excited to welcome you all to today's highly anticipated webinar entitled Committee Insights, Concepts for Regulatory Consideration, Shifting the Conversation from Cannabis versus Hemp to the Cannabinoids. As the cannabis and hemp industries continue to evolve, navigating the regulatory landscape has proven to be both challenging and complex. Today, we're delving into the heart of this matter by focusing on the constituents that truly matter to this conversation, the cannabinoids. Our minor, novel, and synthetic cannabinoid series reaches its fifth and final installment, bringing together cannabinoid product manufacturers to share their insights on the impact these varying regulations have on their businesses and what harmonized regulations for consumer products containing cannabinoids, might look like in the future. In addition to these members of NCIA's Cannabis Manufacturing, Scientific Advisory, and Hemp committees, we're also honored to be joined by Cannabis Regulators Association today, who will be providing an invaluable on-the-ground perspective on how their members are tackling this issue amongst the patchwork of regulations across the nation. The shift in focus from cannabis versus hemp conversation to cannabinoids themselves presents a promising potential solution. So by honing in on the regulation of cannabinoids, we can streamline the debate and develop proportional measures to safeguard public health while maintaining a thriving marketplace for cannabinoid products. Our distinguished panelists will share their valuable insights and expertise, offering fresh perspectives on the challenges faced by the cannabinoid-containing consumer product space, and their collective knowledge will shed light on potential solutions to this complex regulatory challenge that we all face. Together, we aim to explore how more efficient and common sense regulations to ensure the well-being of consumers and promote a vibrant marketplace for these products. All right, enough of this intro. Let's get this show on the road. Kick things off, I'd like to welcome our esteemed panel of industry experts to the stage, which has been spearheading the development of this multi-part series over the past few months. Our working group's fearless leader and chair emeritus of NCIA's Cannabis Manufacturing Committee, Darwin Millard, better known as the Spock of Cannabis, will be serving as the moderator for today's program. In case you don't know Darwin by now, Darwin serves as the vice chair on the ASTM International D37 Subcommittee on Cannabis, as well as the chief science officer for Spinal Bell, a leading end-to-end supply chain solution that allows leading cannabis brands to quickly move products from concept to shelf across multiple geographies. It's great to see you here, Darwin. I've enjoyed immensely working with you over the last few months, developing this program and having it all culminate in today's series. So with that, I'll turn it right over to you to lead the panel through some introductions themselves, and then we'll dive right into the conversation.
Awesome, Brian. Thank you so much for having me be here and giving me an opportunity to moderate this amazing panel. I am so excited to introduce our speakers. And first and foremost here, we have Chris Hope. And I'll let you introduce yourself, sir, really quickly for our audience.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Darwin. Yes, my name is Chris Hope. I am the CEO of Sequoia Management Group, a cannabis and hemp consulting company. I have worked both in the cannabis industry and in the cannabinoid hemp industry. And over the last year and a half, I have been transitioning into industrial hemp. I am the chair of the hemp committee for the National Cannabis Industry Association, as well as being part of the NCIA Novel Synthetic and Minor Cannabinoid Working Group. In addition to that, I'm on the Sustainability Council for NCIA, and then with ASTM, I'm on the D37 Industrial Hemp Subcommittee for Cannabis and Hemp, and the D37.09 Sustainability Subcommittee for the Cannabis and Hemp.
Thanks so much, Chris. And next we have James Granger.
How's it going, everyone? I'm James Granger. I'm the Chief Political Officer for our Clientele Capital Management Group, representing the Clear brand of products across 12 states. Thank you.
Awesome. Short and sweet. Love it. Next, we have Keith Butler.
Hello, everyone. I'm Keith Butler. I'm the CEO of OP Innovates. We have a variety of brands, 13th Floor, Hemp Mellow, Overcome, and I'm sitting in America's first Cannabis Alcohol Lounge, Cannabis Bar in Lexington, Kentucky. So I am the chair emeritus of the Hemp Committee for the National Cannabis Industry Association and a 40-year veteran of legalization for both cannabis and hemp. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Keith. Excellent. Awesome. And someone I'm really excited to introduce, we have Casson Coleman, amazing recording secretary for the ASTM D3708 on personal use cannabis devices and appliances. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Casson Coleman. I'm the founder of Casson Consulting, building facilities across 6 different states and launching products for consumers for the last 10 years. As Darwin said, I'm currently on an ASTM D37 as well, and I'm the current vice chair of National Cannabis Industry Association's Scientific Advisory Committee.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Casson. And finally, last but not least, I am incredibly honored to introduce Jillian Shower.
You got it right.
Woo! Okay. With Cannabis Regulators Association to introduce herself. And thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, it's an honor to be here. Thanks for having me. So I'm Jillian Shower, Executive Director of the Cannabis Regulators Association. We're a nonpartisan association of government agencies across 45 states, US territories, and Canada, who are involved in implementing cannabis regulation. So happy to have the regulatory perspective on this final installment of what's been a really educational series.
Excellent. And we're super excited to have you here because we love our regulators and we need to have a good open relationship with them. So to kick things off, let's dive into this. Let's get a better idea of what the problem really is that we're addressing. Let's understand, those various different regulatory marketplaces that are out there. So I'd like to open as a general question to everybody on the panel. How do the regulations for consumer products that contain cannabinoids differ between marijuana and hemp? And what are some of the commonalities in their regulatory frameworks that we see? So what are the differences that we currently see within the marketplace? And what are some commonalities that we're currently seeing? And James, I'll open it up with you, sir.
Thanks, Darwin. So operating primarily in the cannabis space, we've been heavily regulated since the start of the inception of this industry, and for good reason. We're leading the way with a product that is intentionally intoxicating and healing and all the good things along with it, but definitely intoxicating. So starting off on that foot, we've had an immense amount of oversights to really understand how this industry gets going. And to preface the cannabis hemp relation here, we do see it as a whole, as cannabinoids, and all cannabinoids have potential. All cannabinoids have good potential, and all cannabinoids have intoxicating potential. So looking at it from the regulatory standpoint of testing and growth, cannabis being monitored to state to really siloed, and in each stage, which we'll get into the conversation, is very different in its approach. And hemp slowly has become a topic, having served here in Colorado on the Senate Bill 205 task force with a couple of people watching as well. It was a real interesting way to start the discussion between the two. And we found that we had a lot more in common than we realized, and that we're all moving towards the same goal, with the exception of a few bad actors, but I believe that exists in most industries. And we take a very proactive approach to ensure that the regulatory structures that are built around this are first and foremost addressing public safety and health. That is A1 to, I believe, every good actor, and especially everyone on this call times 100, and then working towards understanding the regulatory loopholes in both sides of the industry and how we can address those and move forward together into a growth phase. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, James, so much. Well, Jillian, I think maybe pass over to you really quickly, where you could maybe address or help us by identifying some of the differences that exist within the marketplace currently.
Yeah, so, as this series has covered very well, there's a plethora of intoxicating hemp-derived cannabinoid products on the market. Those products come from the same plant, Cannabis sativa L, that regulated state marijuana products come from. So we effectively have created, through the Farm Bill, two different markets, two different regulatory approaches for the same types of products, which I think is extremely challenging. And just to review the stark differences, the cannabis markets in states have been regulated with public health, consumer safety, youth prevention as a focus. That's not what we've seen in the hemp market. So the cannabis market is highly regulated. There's testing of products. There's required packaging and labeling. There's a certain infrastructure for the retail environment to make sure that it's adult only. For hemp products, you can purchase these products without having federal requirements for testing, without having federal requirements for labeling, without having to tell consumers what's in them. You can sell them where consumers are purchasing other products, groceries, drugstores, beer, whatever. You can sell them with no tax. You can buy them with a credit card. So we've effectively created two different markets. I think the state regulated marijuana market versus the cannabinoid hemp market. Cannabinoid hemp is effectively an alternative unregulated market for intoxicating cannabinoids that does not have a focus on public health and safety. And we'd like to see that change.
Thank you, Julie. Much appreciated. And Keith, I'll give you an opportunity here to close us out on this session and move us into the next one. You've got 60 seconds. Maybe you could address some of the other challenges you see and maybe some similarities that are out there.
Wonderful. Thank you, Darwin. There are a lot of challenges, that's for sure. So I'm in the hemp manufacturing space. I have been manufacturing natural hemp products from the very beginning, refusing to go along the synthetic pathway. And that appears to be the divergent thing here is the cannabis industry is selling in general all natural products, while the hemp industry, in order to skirt and utilize the loopholes created by the Farm Bill, has created an entire industry based on synthetic compounds. And those synthetic compounds were created at dosage levels that were just astronomical. So I've seen dosages as high as 1,000 milligrams of a synthetic THC in a single product, which is just off the charts. So that's really where our regulatory issues have been created by these bad players in the hemp industry, creating these synthetic models to skirt federal regulations and the Farm Bill to make profit. And as the states pull out of the hemp industry, so do they. Those players just walk away and move on to the next product. Whereas the people on this panel and the people that are a part of this organization are dedicated to this plant, to bringing it forward. And hemp is a very important commodity that we're going to need for the future. So having the hemp plant taken away because of fear or over-regulation is going to hurt us all in the long run. So I'm trying to help that, stop that, and save us all. So
thank you, Keith.
I could go on for days, Darwin. You're welcome.
Yeah, no worries. Of course, we appreciate that. That helps transition us beautifully in the next discussion, which is really identifying more of those direct impacts due to these various different regulatory marketplaces, right? We have 50 different states and practically 50 different ways to approach both the marijuana question and the hemp question. So that's not good for anybody, whether that's the consumer or the operator or the regulator trying to navigate that space. So what are maybe some of those key challenges that are currently being faced by you all as manufacturers and regulators being faced within the cannabinoid-containing consumer products marketplace because of those varying regulations? And maybe, Casson, you could address some of those things as a manufacturer, how those might impact you directly, and maybe some of the general challenges that you see in the marketplace.
Yeah, I think, the number one way this impacts me is, I order products from other states. Those other states have different regulations than the state I'm in, trying to make sure that the testing requirements align to what we actually need here. Often means that, we receive materials, we're providing documentation to the regulator. The regulator then is like, hey, this doesn't actually meet our requirements, even though it was legal, right? Even though it came from a state, it came licensed, it's appropriately documented, or at least as close as we can get. It doesn't meet the requirements here. Right. And, a lot of things aren't actually made in Michigan where I'm operating now. So that can cause a lot of confusion and a lot of duplicate testing and those kinds of things. And often, at least for me, it's led to, hey, we actually retested under, Michigan's rules, and this totally amazing passing product that just got shipped to me from, Colorado is no longer passing the requirements here, which is, frustrating. For a broader, like more specific thing for myself, having been now in the industry and worked on both sides, of this line, what I'm seeing is, the experience that the consumer has and the experience that the employees have inside a regulated environment, because it's so different, what you think is the right thing to do, and you're doing the best to follow rules to make sure consumers are safe, and you miss the mark. For myself, I've missed the mark on things as simple as not understanding chains of custody that are requirements across different states, and then missing a document or two. When I first started with hemp, one of my operators, he got arrested doing his job, which was literally to go out and clip the top of the plant and test it. But for whatever reason, he had too much, and he didn't have the right information when he was in Kentucky, right? Those rules ostensibly were the same as Colorado's, right? But were being enforced differently. This has been a few years ago, but these kinds of things are still happening, where some people are getting shut down, and enforcement action is happening in municipalities, and it's not happening in other places.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Cashin. Appreciate those perspectives. Chris, maybe you could let us know some of those general challenges that are facing other operators.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think I have an interesting perspective. I come from the cannabis industry. I had a cannabis retail delivery service the last decade, starting a decade ago in Los Angeles, transitioned to hemp, and was growing in Missouri in the Kansas City area for cannabinoids. As that market got flooded, it was challenging, and I went back to some of my roots. I have a background in green building, so we are growing in the Midwest, in Eastern Missouri, Southern Illinois, and Western Kentucky for hemp wood and some other processors to make products that are not intoxicating. They're not intended. We want as little intoxicating cannabinoids in there as possible, because we just want building materials. And just recently, Illinois was passing an omnibus cannabis bill that was addressing hemp. And what it was going to say is, if we grew hot, which was above 0.3% THC, not only did we have to destroy the product, we could be seen as fraud, and we could be our whole business could be taken down, closed, and we would be shut out of the business, rather than just saying, oops, we grew, and it was a challenge, and we went over the 0.3%. And so that, fortunately, was pushed out of that bill, but these are some of the challenges that we have. And so why do we need to follow with industrial hemp when we're growing for wood flooring? Why do we have to have the same rules and regulations for those who are growing for cannabinoids? So there's a lot of challenges with that. Thank you, Darwin.
Absolutely. No, great points, Chris, and providing us with valuable perspective, right? As we try to harmonize the industry around a single plant with challenging and interesting nuances related to it. Jillian, I was wondering if you could maybe jump in and give us some of what is this fractured marketplace, how that makes the challenge of regulators difficult in actually being able to regulate.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, there is a patchwork of policy, which is challenging for everybody. We see some states prohibiting certain intoxicating cannabinoids. We see some states providing a regulatory framework through their Department of Agriculture. Increasingly, we see states bringing some of these products underneath their marijuana or cannabis regulatory agency. The challenge, though, is not all of these state marijuana or cannabis regulators have authority to address the products. It may be outside of their scope. We also still have some states that are using USDA's approach to hemp. And so the authority is a big question. Increasingly, we see state policies being made by state legislatures as well. And this, as I think evidenced by this 5-part series, is an extremely complex and nuanced topic. And state legislatures are challenged with lots of other issues happening in our world today. This is only one of many. So I think there can be scientific barriers to sort of understanding what's needed in regulation. And we can often see policies come about in states that maybe aren't what the cannabis or hemp regulator would necessarily want. Other challenges for state regulators, these products have interstate commerce and online sales. And so even if a state does their best to sort of shore up the market and figure out a unified approach, without federal engagement, they really cannot have the authority they need to address that interstate commerce piece and to address the online market. So there are federal gaps. There are gaps where federal agencies would normally help states and are not, because this is, wrapped up in cannabis and there's federal illegality there. So we really need a comprehensive federal approach that sets some minimum standards to avoid the kind of patchwork that we're recreating for hemp that we know we have for marijuana and are trying to work through. So federal minimums for holistic policy would really be what regulators would like to see.
Thank you so much, Jillian. Casson, I see your hand is up. Please go right ahead. You got like 60 seconds so we can transfer into the next discussion.
Yeah, of course. I just wanted to add to that, these online sales that Jillian talked about. At this point in the state of Michigan, a person can purchase a hemp product that legally has more THC in it than a product I can make in the licensed marijuana operator here in the state of Michigan for sale in a dispensary. And they can purchase it, from a gas station, or they could have it drop shipped to their house. I can't drop ship anything to someone in the state of Michigan legally, right? So it's the competition is fierce, and it's creating an unfair market where some people went through the process of getting licensed and doing the right thing, and other operators also went through the process of getting licensed and doing the right thing, but they're just playing by completely different sets of rules.
Excellent points, Casson. Thank you so much. So you guys have been hearing us talk about this term, this concept, consumer products that contain cannabinoids. But what exactly is a consumer product that contains cannabinoids, and how is it, since we've been kind of culminating this discussion now around that topic, how is this potentially a solution for these problems? So just to break this down really easy for everybody to understand this incredibly complex discussion and new concept, really, right? Because these are novel products and they deserve the being classified as such and being treated as such. We haven't really ever had consumer products that contain cannabinoids being sold in the marketplace like we now see today. That just hasn't existed before. So a consumer product that contains cannabinoids is one that is or contains more than 0.3% total delta 9 THC, or more than 1% total cannabinoids, or both. I'll also like to emphasize that a consumer product that contains cannabinoids can be made using any type of cannabinoid, regardless of source, whether that be derived naturally from a plant, produced through precision fermentation, or manufactured in the lab. And includes the novel, minor, and synthetic cannabinoids that we've been discussing over this 5-part series. And finally, a consumer product that contains cannabinoids can be made using a cannabinoid that can be classified as either intoxicating or non-intoxicating, or both. So this concept really allows us to redirect our conversation away from marijuana versus hemp, or is it cannabis, or what are we actually talking about here, and focuses it on our actual constituent of concern. We're actually stressing over the cannabinoids here. So James, I'd like to open it up to you, sir, to really kind of dive into this first, but how can this concept really be leveraged to develop more sensible and effective regulations for these products?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of defining the product containing cannabinoids, and I know it'll lead to the further conversation down the line of this webinar regarding approaches to cannabinoids or plants. But overall, sorry, forgive me for getting on this, but we manufacture a product that contains cannabinoids for a desired effect. There's also a category within this, and one thing that I want to address within this conversation and this bit to kind of continue down this, because I know Keith has some excellent viewpoints on this as well, and I really appreciate his viewpoints on this, is in terms of both, we have a category here that we developed in Colorado called a potentially intoxicating cannabinoid. We're looking at, as the approach of regulating cannabinoids grows, and again, we have issues with that we'll discuss later about the whack-a-mole approach to handling individual cannabinoids. Looking at these buckets, looking at these categories allows us to develop the conversation past what these are. And of course, there's going to be a lot that are in the what we call potentially intoxicating cannabinoid category, which it will be something that I ring the bell on quite a lot. Is we need a lot more research to classify these in a way that we can develop the usage for them. I think we could start with a very baseline approach of ones that we do know that we've had thousands of years of empirical experience on, THC and CBD essentially. But really, we haven't gotten to a point, and maybe I'm getting on a tangent here, of seeing what the effects are of taking these minor cannabinoids and concentrating them and using them in isolation at the levels that we are. We're in a new paradigm of creating consumer packaged goods for cannabis. And, I think we need to start with what we know, start with what we've studied, and then move into the development of regulation around that. And again, the intoxicating and non-intoxicating is a great way to start, and looking at the need for regulation around those. I believe that, and I hope that the CBD work group that's going on gets there, and has the dietary supplement clause. I'll let Keith kind of talk on the dietary supplement side of things, but we're still in the infancy of developing the understanding of a lot of these cannabinoids. So as we take a regulatory approach to it, let's set up what we know, let's set up where we're going, let's set up these buckets, and then we can develop a conversation further on that.
Thanks, James. Much appreciated. Catherine, I was hoping to give you an opportunity to maybe discuss how this concept of defining this novel product category as consumer products that contain cannabinoids can be leveraged to produce more sensible regulations for our marketplace.
Well, I mean, just starting with treating it all as one thing, regardless of which licensed operator it came from. If the citizens of Michigan, just as an example, say, hey, this is what we want the upper limit of our products to be, right? Which they did by petition that was then sent to the legislature. Why are we treating the plant differently? Why are we treating the consumer products differently? When people are expecting those limits on dosage, they're expecting child protections and those kinds of things. If we just treat it at if we say, hey, the plant is actually the same plant, and cannabinoids are all can come from anywhere, and then also just acknowledge that they don't even have to come from the cannabis sativa L plant, right? At this point, synthetic cannabinoids can come from other places. They're putting them in tobacco, they're putting them in corn, you can make them out of all kinds of stuff, right? So just say, hey, that's the category, right? And everybody flies by the same rules. Means less confusion about which rules you're following, especially if you're working in both sides, right? I'm happy to get flower from hemp processors, right? In the same way, I'm happy to cultivate my own here in the state of Michigan. Being able to play by the one set of rules be super, amazing. And for many of us that are in multiple states, wow, having that be at the federal level instead of piecemeal by state or even by county would be really great.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much, Cass. And Keith, I was going to throw you that opportunity there too, to maybe muse upon this concept as well and how it could be leveraged to help us develop more sensible regulations.
Boy, that's a tough question, Darwin. So I view this, and all of you, I have great respect for everyone on this panel. We've all worked together for a long time. So as many of you know, I believe that the plant in its natural form should be allowed freely to the public. I believe it's the companion plant for humans and all mammals. And where I think the delineation line should be is in the synthetic or converted cannabinoids, which have no historical safety data. So I'd like to see the products split into two categories. One, naturally extracted plants, products from the plant itself, following a reasonable guideline of regulatory authority. And then the synthetic cannabinoids looked at in a different way, where some research would start on these cannabinoids for safety profiles, what they actually do, how they affect the body, and maybe the government could pony up some cash to do this, because companies like everyone on this webinar are paying the bill to do this science ourselves. And it's quite expensive. So we could use a little help from the government on the science side to determine what is and what is not safe, how it should be packaged, and how it should be regulated.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Keith. So moving right along, want to keep us all engaged. So now that we've kind of fleshed out this, this novel concept, right? Talking no longer about marijuana-derived cannabinoids or hemp-derived cannabinoids or whatever cannabinoids, basically, but instead, is it a cannabinoid? Check. Did you put it in a consumer product? Check. then does it meet the specifications defined, i.e. is it over 0.3% total delta 9 THC or total 1% total cannabinoids or both? Check. Then you're a consumer product that contains cannabinoids now, and that might mean that you need different types of a new way of approaching this concept. So out of curiosity, both Chris and Jillian, while we have last couple of moments here in this discussion, now that we have this new concept, consumer products that contain cannabinoids, what do we do with the terms cannabis, marijuana, and hemp? Do we actually need them to describe these types of product categories? And Chris, I'll leave it. I'll open it up with you, sir.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm going to address this live right now. There was somebody in the Q&A asked, I'm a patient advocate in the cannabis space since the early 90s. I appreciate the attempt to bring all the cannabinoids front and center. I have grave concerns about consumer safety and the use of synthetic or non-plant cannabinoids, to Mr. Butler's point. I think this is great. I think we can talk about this right here, right now. Yes, and this is some of the challenges that we're having when we go and lobby is we're still dealing with politicians and their staff that don't understand that this is the issue, is that it's cannabinoids versus the plant. And it's the devil's lettuce. And that's what we're regulating. And as I indicated before, I've moved toward industrial hemp, which has no intoxicating, we're looking for no intoxication whatsoever, but we're still dealing with politicians that see it all the same. So how we go about it, I don't even actually have the answers, and I really look forward to hearing what Jillian has to say. I think we just this is what we need to do, is have these discussions right now of how do we regulate it. I think it's the cannabinoids. I think that we're going to move to it. We call it we can call it the cannabis and hemp industry, and I think in 5, 10, definitely in 20 years from now, we won't be distinguishing these as two different industries whatsoever. It's just how policy has been unveiled with these different products. So I look forward to hearing what Jillian has to say.
Appreciate it, Chris. Go right ahead, Jillian.
Sorry. I think until we have a federal framework that accounts for all of these under one umbrella, we will still have to use the terms marijuana and hemp. And I actually, several years ago, had moved away from marijuana. We all know it's a racially charged term. I was using cannabis, and then the Farm Bill happened, and it felt necessary to distinguish, is it hemp or is it marijuana? But I think this idea of regulating the cannabinoid is an intriguing one, but does pose some challenges for implementation. And that's where, regulators are going to think about what can you enforce, what can you implement? So I think the manufacturing matters greatly. I don't know that we have enough science to say a cannabinoid is a cannabinoid, regardless of where you got it from, unless you have regulations for manufacturing to make sure that the manufacturing yields the same product and doesn't create a stereoisomer or doesn't leave byproducts. I think there are likely to be thresholds at which something moves from non-intoxicating to intoxicating. That will matter a lot for regulators. And I don't think we know what all those thresholds are. I think there are a number of cannabinoids that we couldn't probably put in either bucket right now, non-intoxicating or intoxicating. And then I think most of the products that we see on the market are increasingly multi-cannabinoid products. So they are not just one thing. They have lots of different cannabinoids. So how do you deal with those? Do you take the intoxicating piece of that, and that's what moves it into a certain regulatory pathway? And then lastly, the 0.3% delta 9 THC. I'll talk about this in the loopholes in a bit, but really can still yield a lot of delta 9 THC in products. And so using that, I know that that's the threshold the Farm Bill set, but I think that that still muddies the waters. We need a cleaner definition, because right now you can make the same products that we see in marijuana markets using that 0.3% dry weight threshold.
Yeah, and thank you, Jillian. Actually, you transitioned us perfectly into our public health discussion, which is next. And you reminded me that I only gave you half of the specification related to what is a consumer product that contains cannabinoids, because I only gave you the specifications for what is an inhalable product format. And for topicals, I apologize, because for ingestibles, you're absolutely right. That 0.3% can be a tremendous amount. So for edibles, it's actually 10 parts per million, which harmonizes with Canada's regulatory definition for what is a hemp product there, and 250 parts per million for total cannabinoids. So it still defines the two, total delta 9 THC less than 10 parts per million, or 250 parts per million total cannabinoids, or both. And then if that ingestible, whether solid or liquid, would now classify as. So that's important, especially when we're defining routes of administration, which leads us directly into our public health discussion, and not only just regulating intoxicating and non-intoxicating cannabinoids, because of course that has the most direct impact to public safety right now, but just in regards to cannabinoids in general. You guys have already identified some of the potential concerns with is like just because this CBD is that CBD when it was manufactured in a different way. When does chirality become really important here, knowing that there are multiple rotations of these molecules and that a version may not be the version that's produced in a plant? And should there be, as you guys have said, acknowledgement of that and standards built around that? So Casson, I'd like to open up on this one. In your opinion, what are some of the most significant risks to public health and safety associated with intoxicating and non-intoxicating cannabinoids?
It's most significant. Inappropriate labeling, I think, is the most significant thing. And that goes for all products, not just ones that have cannabinoids in them. Things being not appropriately labeled, that means a person's consuming something they don't really understand. They can overdose themselves, they can underdose themselves, right? They can get a completely different experience than it's expected. Without any, real regulations about how things are supposed to be labeled or even tested, it's hard to make sure that, people are going to know what they're actually buying. And as consumers, at least in the United States, we expect that, a package is going to say, I have broccoli and Delta 9 in me, and that it actually contains only broccoli and Delta 9, not, cauliflower. Okay, that's the expectation. I would think the second one really has to do with production facilities and control of production facilities and processes. We start talking about byproducts, we start talking about residual solvents, we start talking about heavy metals. These are things that every other edible product in the country has standards for, right? When you're consuming an apple, you're not like, I wonder if this apple has a bunch of residual solvents on it and is full of a lot of heavy metals that are above a legal limit, because you know that it's been tested and someone's monitoring for that. Right now, for hemp products, depending on the state you're in, that's not the case.
Thank you, Casson. Yeah, and Jillian, I wanted to give you an opportunity. Maybe you could elucidate a little bit for us on how regulators could strike a balance in addressing these risks that Casson has just eloquently pointed out for us to ensure a functional and vibrant cannabinoid product marketplace.
Yeah, well, that's a 10-hour-long question, but I would add one thing to what Casson said, which is youth access. I think one of the most successful things about state regulated marijuana markets is that they are adult only, and they do a really good job being adult only. Compliance across states with adult only sales is much, much higher than we see for alcohol or tobacco products. And hemp products are widely accessible to youth online in, retail locations that youth frequent. So I think that's a huge issue. Also, I think when consumers are purchasing a hemp product, they may not even know that it's intoxicating, and they're purchasing it where they purchase other consumer products. So I think they likely assume this product is regulated because the other products I'm purchasing in this grocery store are regulated. So the consumer awareness piece and youth access pieces are huge. How do regulators fix this problem? I'm going to be a broken record here. We need federal engagement. We need FDA to get engaged. FDA has far more resources than states do to help figure out what new molecules are coming on the market, how safe they are, at what levels. We really need them as a regulatory partner. And then I think increasingly, the more we put all of this under one umbrella, whether that's at a state or federal level, the easier it will be to sort of see the different pathways for the finished products. It is just extremely challenging to have, again, the same exact products that we see on adult use cannabis markets be marketed under hemp with no regulations. And right now, there are a lot of states that cannot do much about that because of existing policies and a lack of a federal framework.
Thank you so much, Jillian. Yeah, and Chris, if you wanted to jump in and give us a little more perspectives, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you, Darwin. You know, here's the thing. We're getting really in the weeds and the nuances, which we need to. I just want to remind people we got 50 states, and 3 of them do not allow any products that have any hemp whatsoever. And I believe they are Kansas, Nebraska, and Idaho. We have, I think, 26 adult use recreational states, and the rest of them have some patchwork of medical cannabis marijuana access. But I'm here in California, and we still only have about 20% of the 540 jurisdictions that allow for Main Street cannabis. And so, and then there's states like Tennessee and Kentucky where, well, Kentucky's coming online, but Tennessee where it's limited. And so access to hemp and Delta 8 and other novel synthetic and minor cannabinoid products is what's available. And there are people, I want to remind everybody, all of our everybody on the panel and our viewers here, that there are people who are dealing with grave medical conditions, ailments, disorders, and that we really need to remember about them. And one of the things, and I'll leave it with this is something I've been thinking about. I really dislike the expression recreational or adult use. I do not like that. Something that I've thought about is open access, because if your child is 15 years old and you're in one of these states and the only thing you can get is a Delta 8 product at a gas station, you're going to do what you're going to do to get access to it. But I believe we should have regulation with that. And so as this is rolled out, and to get Jillian's point, we need to have federal oversight on that. So thank you very much. I just want to remind everybody why we're really in this industry.
Thanks,
And all
Chris.
the more reason to keep patients safe, right? Like they should be getting regulated products. That's
absolutely, absolutely.
Thanks,
We're not
guys.
there.
I appreciate
We're
the conversations. Just want to make sure that we move into the other parts of our. We've got a lot of things we need to cover. And just want to make sure, cue this one up here for James, that, so we've been talking a lot about consumer products that contain cannabinoids, right? And intoxicating and non-intoxicating cannabinoids, and how a consumer product that contains cannabinoids could be classified as one that contains intoxicating or non-intoxicating or both. And given the consequences of the current Farm Bill, those could also then be classified as hemp. But is that appropriate? Should that be allowed? So from an operating perspective, how does approaching this problem from the lens of consumer products that contain cannabinoids help solve that issue?
Sure, I'll do a quick crack at this. Keith and Chris and I did some direct lobbying in DC. We went and met with the Senate Ag Committee. And one of the big takeaways from that was addressing most of these issues with them was, the regulation standpoint of using hemp and marijuana separately. We've had to go back to that here in Colorado. There are, but one of the angles of pushing for, hey, we need to be looking at regulating cannabinoids versus the plants themselves, is the preparation and harmonization of, to Jillian's point, these 50 state patchwork. If we're not all speaking the same language, we're not ready for the next step of interstate commerce or legalization. And having those agreed upon, having that direction agreed upon, is going to allow us as manufacturers to be able to quantify in all of our operating states kind of where the goal and where the pushes are and how we can address all the slew of topics that go down the list, from packaging, labeling, testing, those type of things. So that's just the 2 cents of why I believe that but I want to hear the counterpoints of it. I know the counterpoints of regulating molecules almost too well. One of the big reasons getting into this field for ourselves as cannabis manufacturers, and from a personal level, is we don't want to go down the route of the whack-a-mole approach of molecule regulation, such as bath salts or K2. So how can we learn from the mistakes of the past, but also harmonize our conversation so we can move to a next step in federal regulation?
Thanks so much, James. I really do appreciate it. And that actually cues us up pretty good for Jillian to help explain more a little bit of what CANNRA's concerns and how federal regulation would help address some of these concerns. And in fact, they published a letter in April of this year that they basically expressed their 3 major concerns related to the lack of testing and labeling requirements and the 0.3% THCA and derivative loopholes that put consumers at risk. And Jillian, I was hoping maybe you could quickly summarize for us what those loopholes are for our listeners.
Yeah, and I think some people don't like the term loophole. So gap, whatever you want to call it, opportunity in the Farm Bill. You guys have talked about this a lot on the series already, so I'll be super quick. The 0.3% Delta 9 THC, of course, that's the definition in the Farm Bill. That's dry weight. That's in the plant. In the plant, that's not a ton of Delta 9 THC, but as soon as you extract that, concentrate that, put that in a heavier item like a chocolate bar or a beverage, you can easily have hundreds of milligrams of hemp legal, Farm Bill legal Delta 9 THC in products that goes well beyond what state regulated cannabis markets allow, which is usually a 5 or 10 milligram serving size and 50 or 100 per package. So that's a huge challenge. And again, the hemp market is going beyond what's allowed in the legal state marijuana markets. The THCA loophole, you've talked about this in prior episodes of this series. THCA is the precursor to Delta 9 THC in the plant. It's the acid form. But as soon as you heat it or combust it, it turns into Delta 9 THC. So we are now seeing entities that are putting up websites online that have products that are literally the exact same products that you can buy in adult use markets, but you can order them online, and they have, flour with 30% THCA and edibles with, THCA, vape cartridges with THCA. The products that you combust, that's going to turn into Delta 9 and be identical to the products in adult use markets, but not tested and not regulated. The derivatives loophole, I think, is the one you've covered the most. And that's just the idea that people are taking CBD and converting it into a bunch of other cannabinoids, some of which we know about and some of which we don't. And regulators have a lot of safety concerns, especially about the ones that we don't know about. And again, this is an area where we would usually go to a federal agency and say, can you look at this? Can you give us a pharmacokinetic, pharmacodynamic read? What is this product? What's in it? A lot of states don't have capacity to do that. So I think those are the biggest challenges being exploited in the Farm Bill. And our concern is without comprehensive regulation federally for hemp that accounts for these loopholes and cannabinoids in general, we will continue to see gaps that will be exploited for a variety of reasons.
Thank you, Jillian. Much appreciated. And so, this next session was a question, but we're running really close to the hour. I want to make sure we save enough time for our last session. But I am an advocate and a bit proponent of ASTM International standards, especially those being developed by Technical Committee D37 on cannabis, which is a volunteer-driven standards committee here to help create consensus standards. Consensus doesn't mean everybody agrees, right? It means that we worked to some type of harmonization. And there are 2 standards in particular, D8441 on specifications for an international symbol for identifying consumer products containing intoxicating cannabinoids, which creates, for the first time ever, an actual universal symbol that is highly encouraged to help promote, as Casson identified as one of the major concerns with public health and safety, is labeling and identifying these products as what they are, that they contain an intoxicating cannabinoid, which Jillian, you also elucidated to. And another really important standard, which helps codify and address many of the concerns, at least in my humble opinion, that CANNRA has addressed, is D8449. Which is an 81-page document which defines specifications for label content and style, format, location, and prominence of elements for consumer products that contain cannabinoids. So I would assume that everybody here agrees that consumer products that contain cannabinoids exist, and in order to help promote public health and safety, we should label those products. And depending on what everybody thinks they should be on the label, there is now a standard around this to help with marketplaces that haven't defined those label regulations yet, and for markets that have, help to navigate this incredibly nuanced conversation. So bringing us right into our final part here, how can we harmonize this incredibly nuanced marketplace? How do we make it so that instead of having all this cloudiness, is it an intoxicating hemp cannabinoid? Is it an intoxicating marijuana cannabinoid? Is this CBD actually CBD, even though I used yeast to precision fermentate it and actually create this out of nothing? Or these two ingredients that I just went and then now all of a sudden I have THCP-VO or whatever, some new molecule. I know Cassin's like, that's not real, but that's kind of the point here, right? Is that we just made a novel cannabinoid and I'm going to put it in a consumer product. What are perhaps the ways, right, that we can create a real functional marketplace? And there were lots of hands in our last conversation, so I want to jump and give Keith the first opportunity to answer. As I've kind of alluded to, right, cannabinoids can be naturally occurring, derived from the cannabis plant, both marijuana and hemp. They can be produced through precision fermentation, right? As well as manufactured just in a lab. So what considerations should be taken into account when we're trying to create harmonized regulations for these new consumer products that contain cannabinoids?
Well, first off, I think packaging is incredibly important. And thank you for the ASTM standards on packaging, getting everybody to follow a guideline of how to describe the product that is in the package, to me, is probably the most important thing we can do. The packaging should state whether the cannabinoid is naturally derived or synthetic, what the quantities are that's in it, and all of the ingredients that are in it, along with codes to the testing for heavy metals and so on and so forth. In the hemp industry, that is not required, and it's patchy in the cannabis industry as to what is required for that information. So I'd love to see a harmonized packaging standard. I think that would be the biggest step forward that we could take as manufacturers. I myself and my company, we've been self-regulating and doing a great job on it, but I see so many products out there that just have no information whatsoever, or false information for that matter, just guided to bring the consumer to purchase the product, and they have no idea what they're purchasing or where it was derived. So that's my 2 cents on it. I got a lot to talk about, but I know we're time short, so
I love it,
else
Keith.
can grab into.
I love it, and you'll hopefully happily be happy to hear that the D37 is working on a packaging specification, and will hopefully be out the ballot soon. So, Cassin, your hand has been up. You're biting at the bit. Let us know your thoughts, please.
Yeah, I think what CANNRA is doing to bring regulators together to talk about these issues is the way. We could ask that the federal government steps in and does something, but we all know it's 5 years later from the Farm Bill. We're not there yet. It's going to be another 5 years, at least 2. And we probably need something now. I think a lot of times people forget that we actually do have frameworks for these things, but they're not working for cannabis, because people want to have these products available without following the normal rules for bringing products to market, right? They don't want to treat it as a dietary supplement. They don't want to treat it as a drug product, right? They want to treat it as something different. If the FDA has said it's not a dietary supplement, right? But it is a drug. But people don't want to go through the pharma work to get there. They just want to have products on market right now. If we all agreed as all of these states to follow the international standards the ASTM is writing, or just to come together and say, hey guys, we all want to make sure that consumers are safe, and these are the minimum standards that we have. We want things to be labeled, we want things to be tested, and we want the manufacturing to be auditable, right? Whether or not we actually go and audit it, but that there's documentation of what's happening so that it could be audited in case something goes wrong, right? That's like the bare minimum. That's what we expect for everything else, and we could do that in all 50 states without any federal intervention if we chose to do so, right? Like each state would have to do it, but it's possible, right? And I feel like at this point, what the FDA has said is, hey, we told you it wasn't a dietary supplement. Don't put it in food. And if you want to submit a new drug application, you can. And then everybody just chose not to, right? So, there are processes that exist. They've worked for lots of other things. Why we're choosing not to allow the regulatory process to work for us for this, I think it is really the history of the plant, and people saying, for so long you made it illegal completely, and we don't, don't give us any rules in this. We don't want to follow the prescribed rules. Even now that we can do the research, right? It's legal now. Last year they put a new rule in place. You can do all the research you want. Go forth and do research, right? You now have the ability to create new drug applications for this, right? There's new clinical trials that have been issued for it. I mean, there's so many things that can be done using the framework, but those things are not going to give people access to the products that they want now. And harmonizing by using the international standards that already exist at each state level will go a long way to making patients who want the products now, not 5 years from now, not 10 years from now, safer.
Thanks, Casson. Jillian, I was hoping you alluded to it earlier as we get real close to time here. I was hoping maybe you could elucidate a little bit more or muse on some of those regulatory challenges you mentioned in approaching this from a molecule lens versus the plant approach as has currently been done.
Yeah, and I covered a lot of these, so I'll be really quick. One that I didn't cover, though, is because we have the patchwork across states, I really think it's hard to do the molecule-based approach until we have a federal framework, because you've got states that have prohibited certain molecules, you've got states that are regulating certain molecules differently. So until you have some federal minimum standards, I think there will be gaps. We have to regulate manufacturing processes above and beyond the molecules. The scope of where the molecules are coming from matters a lot, especially for implementation. I think the multi-cannabinoid products is an issue, the thresholds and kind of nuance of when something becomes intoxicating and when it's not. Those are other issues that I think are really important. And I appreciate you, Casson, saying that, regulators can come together and harmonize. We are absolutely trying to do that. I took this job and left sort of a public health research track because I wanted to do that. But because state legislatures are so engaged in making policy, the buck does not just end with the regulator. You really have to have well-educated state legislatures, because if regulators all get together and say, we want this, that's great, but then they have to all go make that happen. Lab testing is a great example where I do think we have a lot of consensus, but there are state legislatures that are deciding you get to test for these 12 pesticides, or you will test for these 18, or it's not a regulatory decision. So I think there needs to be more engagement from all parties with state legislatures to try to bring them up to speed so that we can harmonize. And ultimately, I think harmonization will depend on federal minimum standards. Awesome. Whether we like that or not.
Totally. Appreciate it, Jillian. Thank you so much for those perspectives. And Chris and James, I'll give you guys both the last word here as we're bleeding over time. Brian has been amazing to give us a few minutes extra, and Jillian has a few minutes to spare with us as we can utilize her time efficiently and get to some of these questions. But now we've kind of explored some potential issues with approaching this regulatory landscape question from the molecular approach versus the plant approach. I was hoping maybe you guys could address maybe how we could make this work, some of the on some of the positives. And Chris, please go right ahead.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So I think this is my forte. This is, where I usually say I'm not the smartest person in the room. I'm smart enough to identify who the smartest people in the room are, and I try to bring them all in the same room together. And this is part of that process. And we have done some great lobbying in person in Washington, D.C. over the last year, but last in September and then in May. And we are moving forward. The Hemp Committee is driving this effort to do virtual lobbying with Washington, D.C. We're also looking at maybe some state level and having meetings. There are 77 members on the ag committees for both the Senate and the House. They're going to be making the decisions. Their staff needs to know. We saw a divergent of understanding of these issues when we went and lobbied in May. Some people were very knowledgeable about it, and some had no idea what we were talking about. And so we're working forward with that. And I agree with Casson that we do need to move forward with regulation and packaging and getting good product to people. But we're not there yet. And there's this gap. We talk about the gap with or the gap or the loopholes. Well, we have a gap between having access to the product as well in this country. So how do we help those folks without hurting them, but then having and then reining it in with a lot of these cowboys out there. And so that one of the things that is being discussed and is that is there the three paths for regulation through the FDA are is a food, a dietary supplement, or a drug. And the drugs are looking at something that is one molecular compound, one receptor, one molecular compound. Well, cannabis isn't that, and hemp isn't that. So how do we look at that? And there are other paths that other countries are using, which is natural medicine, natural products. And how can we get to that point? So this gets back to the FDA. They're only working, their hands are tied and they have handcuffs on them. They cannot make, they can't move forward with it. But on that note, the harmonization of this, we are even having problems within NCIA and the hemp to have consensus. And you talked a lot about that harmonization and consensus, Darwin. And we came up with 4 talking points. We have more that we wanted to discuss, but there was only 4 that we could actually come up with our talking points. And they were: 1, increasing THC, total THC for products that for hemp that come out of the ground. Number 2, we really want the federal government to help and guide through education to encourage banking, lending, and insurance, because these are some big hurdles that we have. There's a lack of knowledge in those industries. We also want to work for an exemption for non-consumable hemp. And then the last one, which kind of addresses this, we had a real hard time coming up with consensus of how to regulate with an age regulation, because there are people on our committee who come from the minorities for medical marijuana. The executive director, Eric Range, really brought up the point that we don't want to recriminalize this. And so what we've come up with is an idea that we can prevent the misuse of THC for teens and young adults by encouraging the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the other health departments around the country to do an education program. So that's kind of my last point on that. And I really look forward to our continued conversation about this.
Thank you, Chris. Much appreciated for this perspective, as always. And James, you get the last word, sir, to close us out.
Well, the last words I have are in terms of harmonization, start before, cart before horse. Let's figure out, I would say, intoxicating and non-intoxicating, start working from there and harmonize our language. I believe language is the wrap up of a lot of the base of what we covered. And just to wrap this into the final of this is a great conclusion to this long webinar series. We've gone into, and for everyone's information, gone into a lot of detail regarding these topics, regarding ththese discussions. And I want to kind of hand it back to Brian as I'm finishing up, but this whole thing, this is a full spectrum approach. We've got all of these amazing webinars that I'll let Brian wrap up on, but I think it goes a great way, and this is a great way to end it. And I want to thank everyone else that I'm chatting with today. So thank you all.
Yeah, fantastic. I don't want to jump in front of everybody, but do want to be aware of all the time constraints that we do have. Jillian has been very gracious and is joining us on her vacation right now. So she does have a hard stop in just 3 or 4 minutes. So specifically wanted to pose any questions to the audience members. If you do have a regulatory framework focused question that Jillian's insights might be specifically interested for, please post that to the Q&A board. And I see Cassin's jumping at the bit. So Cassin, do you have a question for Jillian in particular?
I do.
I thought so. Perfect.
Okay, so we all know that this hearing is happening tomorrow. This is the first opportunity since last April to talk to Congress about these rules. What if you could tell them 3 things? What would they be, and how can we support those efforts?
Yeah, so Cassin's referring to the House Oversight Committee having a hearing tomorrow that I was called away from my vacation to testify for, and I'm happy to make sure there's a regulatory perspective. We think the hearing is going to be about regulating CBD through a dietary supplement pathway, although the framing of the hearing is much broader. But I think from a regulatory vantage, we feel that it is really challenging to just focus on CBD when it is being used to make a lot of these other intoxicants, and that we do need to have a more holistic framework. I think regulators also have experienced firsthand the challenge of trying to fit a square peg in a round hole and, say that a cannabinoid is just a dietary supplement. It's lots of different modalities of consumption, inhalables, and combusted products don't fit into a dietary or food supplement pathway. So I think there are lots of challenges with that. We would like a federal regulator to be named for hemp-derived cannabinoid products. That did not happen through the Farm Bill, and we would like to see that. We'd like to see the regulator be an agency with public health and safety focus, like FDA. We'd like a short timeline for their regulatory work, which I think is really important. We cannot wait for this. And we'd like to see them take, again, a holistic approach. And that does not mean that every product or cannabinoid is regulated the same. It means you're considering all of them when you put your regulations together. And increasingly, I think states are finding that that's where the sweet spot is for them as well, that they are able to consider all of them and come out with approaches that work for the right product in the right situation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jillian. And it looks like we have just a few more moments. I do want to be respectful for you, but we did receive a question from our registrants ahead of time, which I think is a good one to ask, and maybe you can end on. It's asking about medical cannabis testing standardization, but I think we could ask more broadly, just standardization and testing in general. Do you feel that that will only occur on the state level if it happens on the federal level first? I think I captured that question correctly.
Yeah, I don't want to say yes, but I feel like I need to say yes. So at CANNRA, we have a really robust lab testing and product safety subcommittee that is co-chaired by Lori Dodson, who I think many of you know. She's fantastic. She's done lab work for the state of Maryland for a number of years. That committee has had a lot of discussions about best practice. But again, I've seen in practice the challenge that regulators have had in being able to implement those discussions about best practice, because it goes through a state legislative process, and that is a political process. Again, doesn't always necessarily have experts in the room who are making decisions. So that's one of the reasons why almost everything we put out from CANNRA is calling for federal minimum standards. We think states should be able to go above and beyond those and should not be preempted. Every state has different politics and populations and policies, but we've got to have some minimums. And I think those minimums will be a key to building harmonization. But we're doing everything we can at CANNRA to prepare for that, to have those best practices in place and in hand, so that if and when a federal agency is allowed to step into this space, we are able to say, here's what regulators think, and here's what they've learned from their experiences, good and bad. So I hope that answers that. But I think lab testing is critically important. And there was discussion about patients. Patients need to know that their products are as safe as we can make them. That is paramount. So we've got to get it right.
Absolutely. And you made a great point about that. Without the federal legislations first, right, then even if we had the standards and tried to move them down through the state level, then the state legislations have their opportunity to put in their 2 cents, which we saw all too well occur just recently in Colorado. And maybe, James, you could touch on that for just half a second, about, the recent, regulatory outcome that happened here or in Colorado.
Sure. So the Colorado one was extremely interesting, that it was preempted a very intense work group with over 120 hours of participation required of the participant of that. And essentially it was structured as a cannabis group, a number of cannabis folk and a number of hemp folk. And they were put in a room and said, fight it out, which I thought was a terrible idea to say fight it out. What we really needed to be doing was building bridges, which is what we did. We addressed our concerns from each end about, protectionism in the industry. We had discussed the image of the industry as a whole, to say these Delta 8 folk are hurting everybody. And after we got through that initial wrangling and battling, we all came together and said, all right, what are we all here for? And really it was public safety. And we were able to develop a comprehensive report that addressed a lot of these issues while still acknowledging the federal legality/illegality of the matter, by including what we called a safe harbor provision that allowed for the production and transport to states that have explicitly allowed those compounds, while in the state creating a pathway for testing, a pathway for that doesn't expose and continue the gas station product category, and supports good actors like Keith and Chris producing products that are safe, that are in with the industry. And I hope that at some point we do move to and this is again, since Julian's here, I can't say this too loud, but sensible regulation, not over-regulation. There, we definitely have some good models. I'm hoping that we take from alcohol that does have its flaws, and that we could move into a sensible regulated market where there's stakeholder participation. And the more stakeholder participation and communication we have with Jillian, and that is we allow them to show the work that we're doing, the new products that we're developing, the groundbreaking we still have to go. As cannabis, we don't want the minor cannabinoids to become banned. That's the last thing we want. We want people to be able to, we want to be able to create new products. We don't know if there's a compound out there in the research that might have a massive impact on Parkinson's disease. And if we're to shut everything down and to take a closed, blinded approach to regulation and to say, lock it all down, be done talking about it, we're not letting ourselves grow as an industry and develop into something that we really could be with good thought leadership.
James, I'll put the challenge out to you. I've had numerous hours of conversation with Michael Cooper and Khurshid Khoja, who I think are the policy committee at NCIA, about this question of overregulation. And my challenge back to them is always, I think every regulator would love to see some white paper that shows the regulations that could be changed or lessened without compromising consumer safety and public health. Like that is, show us the low-hanging fruit. With that in mind, and I think you're going to have a really interested audience. So I put that challenge out to you, and I think regulators will have open ears.
And I'm so glad we have Cassin on our side, because she can write the heck out of a white paper. So
I love that. I mean, honestly, Jillian, you just gave us, I think, a quite easily accomplishable deliverable as industry, is to provide proposed regulatory changes that would actually promote the marketplace that we want. Question I would pose back to you, though, but I know that you have to drop, and we respect your time so much, so we don't have to answer it now. But it's given that sometimes regulators would see proposals from industry as being biased or perhaps having an agenda, how would we provide this, white paper recommendations, etc., to regulators to consider without them just being like, oh, this has an agenda and we're not going to look at it?
So I think I've seen regulators work with industry in a really good faith way. And I think something that comes out of NCIA that represents a collection of industry participants that says, hey, we've identified the following areas where we think regulations could be lessened without compromising public health and safety. And here's the evidence of how we don't think public health and consumer safety or youth access would be compromised. I can't imagine a regulator that wouldn't be interested in that. Everyone who comes to a regulator typically has a horse in the race somewhere. They're used to that. They hear from all different stakeholders, but I see them have very open ears in trying to choose the best path. And that's one of the reasons they have such a hard job. They're often not beloved, right? They're either too public health and industry doesn't like them, or they're too pro-industry and public health doesn't like them. I think when they take a middle ground, nobody likes them. And the middle ground is, the space that they try to occupy. So I think any insider information that can come from NCIA that's well-researched would be really well regarded. And we've seen a lot of papers regarding equity and energy and environment that have come from NCIA, that have come from the Minority Cannabis Business Association, that really regulators have acted on. They've started to make changes in policy because of those. So I think I'll end with the challenge. You guys could definitely continue the conversation, but I don't want to miss my flight to be there tomorrow. So it was an honor to be here. Thank you so much. Appreciate the time. And please continue to take questions without me.
Thank you, Jillian.
Thank you. And with that, Chris, I see your hands up, and you have great insights to provide. So I'd love to give you that opportunity, sir.
I'm just going to make it quickly. I think we did lose Jillian here, but to the challenge, I think it's great. But I think we are going to have it at different stages. What if the Farm Bill stays exactly the same? And first of all, we have between now and quote unquote September 30th when the Farm Bill expires. So and then what if it just stays exactly the same? Or what if they take an approach? What if the FDA comes down? So this is the moving target that we have with our challenge. So there kind of is this, what if this happens, this would be the way to regulate it. But if it doesn't, then this is our alternative. So that it's just an open observation to our challenge. So
It sounds like a great follow-up program that we could be doing later this fall. So yeah, I love that. Maybe we can all just sort of softly put that in our calendar of time to come back later this fall or early next year and report on that. Well, great.
Absolutely.
I know. Were there any other questions amongst the panel, either from the live Q&A questions that we got here or the batch of questions we received on social media or during the registration process that were particularly worthwhile and something that you wanted to make sure we captured on the live broadcast and then the recording from here moving forward?
To answer Sam in the chat right there, I was on the traditional market many years before I came over to the regulated market, so plenty of interactions with the police, put it that way.
Hey, Keith, glad to have you back, sir. We know your computer died. Casson,
It
I did
did.
see your hand went up if you wanted to go ahead. Did you happen to see any of these questions that we got from our registrants or from social media that might be worth digging into a little bit?
Yeah,
I
for
did
sure.
not. I
Oh,
just bounced
Keith, go
back
ahead.
on. So I did not. I just bounced back on. My computer died.
No
So I just
worries,
wanted
Keith.
to thank everyone for this wonderful series. And, of course, thank you for participating. So
Yeah, of course. So go right ahead, Casson.
Yeah, so I feel like one of the questions from social media really has to do with these online sales that are happening and how those online sales can be age gated more effectively. I think that this is one important aspect to this beyond everything else that we've talked here is, hey, now you're making these online sales, things are being drop shipped to your door, and how can you return them? How can you make sure your kid's safe? How can we make sure your kid's not the one buying it? For the request in this question was specific to like, hey, we expect FedEx and UPS to do these things, which is not something FedEx and UPS does for any product today. All of that age gating is done in different ways. If you're selling, tobacco products, or you're selling alcohol products over the internet, or if you're selling, like pharmaceuticals over the internet, the age gating is done in a different way. In the European Union, they actually are coming out with something else to help with this right now for online sales. We actually get a certificate as an adult, and that certificate, has a digital fingerprint that you can use to purchase things that would otherwise be age gated. So then the purchase would happen and it would come to your house. Nobody would verify your ID because they already verified it at the purchase. Whether or not the United States decides to, go the way of the European Union, we can't know. But there are some pathways that we could do this that don't mean additional regulation, that don't mean having to be present when the FedEx guy brings your package to show him your ID. Right. So there are ways we can do this on the front end. Certainly those things can always be hacked. At least, the European Union is saying their certificates can't be hacked, but things can be hacked. That's more of like, a parenting issue there. I felt like that was an important thing to talk about because, the online sales of these products, we're talking billions of dollars at this point, right? So they're everywhere.
Absolutely, Cassie. Great points. And I just threw it in the chat there, but all the more reasons, or you've identified some clear areas where standards, or just if that term is nebulous, tools for for operators within our industry to use to help navigate this marketplace and to help create consistent products that promote public health and safety, which is of course the main thing we're trying to promote here. I see you're kind of poking at the other one there, Casson, related to GMP and GAPs, but I think it. I think there are. The question essentially asks, is this panel going to propose that we levy increased standards on the marketplace, say requiring good agricultural practices during the growing and harvesting of cannabis plants, or perhaps GMP during the manufacture of extracts from a cannabis plant, or as for the production of bulk ingredients or APIs directly, or as a non-consumer good being sold to a product manufacturer, or are you making a finished good, right? Is that going to be your final product that you need to have? And again, GMPs apply. So I think the question is more of it's asking, would everybody need to be on the same playing field related to both marijuana and hemp operators? And is that something that we as a panel would promote? I certainly would promote that. And I guess I'd love to hear the feedback from, say, Keith or Chris on your perspectives.
I'll go for a perspective there. Hemp and cannabis are exactly the same plant. So all of the regulations should be the same. And cannabis was legalized when hemp was legalized in the 2018 Farm Bill. Been saying that all along. And apparently nobody wants to accept that. Everyone wants to regulate and govern these in two separate ways. But that's what I'd like to see ultimately is a combined regulatory authority over both that regulates the packaging and the safety protocols that we put together in these products, not necessarily over-regulating and criminalizing that which we do. I don't believe government has any authority over nature, quite frankly, and I've always stood by that point. So I'll leave it at that.
Awesome. No, great points, Keith. Chris, perhaps you'd want to muse further.
Exactly. I want to see this. I do, as I mentioned earlier in this webinar, that I believe that the industry will be the same, and and the cannabis and hemp. It's this bridge between now and what it's this partially the cannabis being super regulated and hemp having these gaps or loopholes, and then us all coming together. I do think that we kind of don't know what we don't know. I think also this is pushing the envelope for natural medicine regulation through the FDA. So, and having a different approach to it, because they are very pigeonholed in how they can, the pathways which way they can approve for products. And so, and I think it would be really enlightening for them to be able to look at other regions and countries and how they approach it, that we can then go towards that that approach to regulating this. The big picture of all of this is I want there to be like, these are my biggest things. I see this, and this is what drives my passion to continue to do this work, is I want there to be as much access to good product that has had some research and development, rigorous research and development to develop those products. I want us to see there. How do we bridge that between now and once we get there completely with the industry? And the other thing is my other big passion is that we need criminal justice reform in this country, and we need to stop putting people in jail and prison for a product that they're taking to help them with Parkinson's or any other disease, ailment, or disorder. So that's what drives me. I don't always have the answers. I just want us to keep on talking.
Appreciate it, Chris. Well, we are right up to the time. I saw Brian basically give us the flag. So Casson, you get to close us out with the last word. And then if you would just transition it over to Brian. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so I'd really like to propose that we have the same GAPs or GMPs or GLPs or GACPs that we have for every other agricultural product that's out there, for every other consumer packaged good that's out there, right? Trying to act as though somehow we should put this in its own category. Why? Like, the only reason we're doing that is because of 100 years of, stigma, right? And federally, prohibition. Like, we don't have to do that. If you're making a topical, you follow the same rules for a topical. If you're making a drug product, you follow the same rules for a drug product. If you're making a food, you follow the same rules for a food product. And yeah, there's going to be maybe some new categories inside there, and we're going to have some new standards for that. But, Sam's question here about, pesticides and things that are being smoked. Yeah, we should be checking those. And normally, if you're bringing a new product to market, you would do normal consumer safety testing, which would include, hey, are there any impurities on your product? Before you brought it, you'd know which impurities there were, and you'd know what limits you're allowed to have, and it'd be part of your spec, whether it was under the Food Codex or USP or whatever random tobacco codexes they use for smoking products, right? Those things exist. We don't have to reinvent the wheel here. We literally just have to use the tools that already exist. And I've been glad to join Darwin on ASTM D37 to do that. Right? The systems are already here. Show up and be part of the process. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Brian to close this out for the rest of the day.
Here, here. Well said.
Yeah, exactly. Here. I thought that I'm glad that we dove so deep into the Q&A segment, to be honest, because I feel like each of these individual questions we addressed queued up each of the panelists in turn to provide a really thought-provoking perspective to close us out and provide that usual sort of final thought segment that we usually would before we tie things together. So we're going to close out today's session. We're going to queue up our end of event credit sequence. As always, give you a quick clue on some of the upcoming programs that we'd love all of your all's continued participation with, and also want to quickly activate an outro poll to get some immediate feedback from you all on how you all took today's sessions and if we missed anything in particular as far as the defined learning objectives. So first off, thank you to all of our panelists for presenting today's program. I've been so honored to work with you all over the last, I think it's been 6 months now, to sort of ideate this multi-part series and then continue to work on each section in turn, one after the other. As so many people published and promoted during the chat room throughout today's conversations, there's, I think, 4 to 5 hours worth of programming that you all can dive into if today was your first entrance into today's multi-part series following this. And I couldn't encourage any of you all more to head to NCIA's website, to our educational webinar archive, to see parts 1 through 4, as well as the other 100+ educational webinars that all of our committee members and supporters have produced for us over the last 3 years in particular. We couldn't get enough of this subject, it seems, amongst our committee members. So I did want to cue you all into sort of an encore for this multi-part series that's being spearheaded by the Risk Management and Insurance Committee early next month. They wanted to specifically dive into the conundrum surrounding cannabis insurance for novel cannabinoids or cannabinoid-containing consumer product goods as a whole. So they're releasing a short update to their risk management and insurance white paper manual, sorry, not white paper, that's being published this week on NCIA's website. You can head there to learn more. You can download that white paper, and if you download that manual, you'll be added to this live session where we're going to be diving deeper into it with 6 members of our Risk Management and Insurance Committee on Tuesday, August 8th. So feel free to head to NCIA's website to sign up and secure your spot for that, and dive into their manual as it's published later today or tomorrow. And then finally, just another huge thank you to all these amazing panelists, Chris, James, Keith, Casson, and Darwin, for helping moderate today's conversation, but also playing such a huge instrumental role in developing 3 through 5 of this series and making sure that it all culminated into this fantastic presentation that we could use to get Jillian and CANNRA, the Cannabis Regulators Association, perspective on this overall topic. So thank you all so much. We'll see you all next time. We'll leave you all with this end of event credit sequence that highlights the 45 sponsors of this year's annual Lobby Day event that a number of our panelists touched on as an amazing in-person advocacy focused activity. And so stay tuned for more details on virtual advocacy events that we're going to be spearheading and leading, as Chris mentioned, later this fall, as well as the potential for us to be working across the board with our allied association program members to specifically work on state-specific lobbying efforts, as Jillian and so many of the other panelists really elucidated during, I'm going to use that word so much now, Darwin, so during the program, and really tried to encourage and emphasize that the buck does not stop with the regulators, it stops with the legislatures. And as NCIA is doing our job on the federal level to provide you all a voice for Main Street cannabis in Capitol Hill, it's really up to you all to provide that voice for Main Street cannabis across the country in all of your state houses as well. So please reach out to us to learn more about how you can get involved in our efforts nationally, but do head to NCIA's website to go to our Allied Association program page that includes over 50 state-specific associations that are doing all of the on-the-ground work for this specific topic around the country as well. So thank you all again for joining us. I hope to see you all again on a future NCIA Industry Essentials educational webinar, hopefully the encore session later next month. But with that, thank you. We'll see you all again, hopefully next time, and have a great day until then. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.